Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses some potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rogers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're talking about the ever-changing field of human resources and how this applies to our partners in emergency services. I want to welcome Suzanne McConkey and Sara Spangler from the Human Resources Department at Glatfelter Insurance Group. Suzanne is the Vice President of Human Resources, and Sara is the Manager of Talent Acquisition and Engagement. Suzanne and Sara are joining us today to discuss HR best practices, especially for those organizations who may not have the resources to employ full-time HR personnel. Hello, Suzanne. Hello, Sara. It's a pleasure to see you both, and I want to thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Chris. We're glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, ma'am. So we have clients where the fire chief, the EMS director, the office manager, or some other administrator may find themselves with HR responsibilities. What are some of the things our listeners should keep in mind if they find themselves in this role?
We're fortunately, Sara and I have worked with several nonprofit organizations serving on boards and HR committees. And I personally have worked in the nonprofit sector before, so we truly understand kind of the small volunteer-led organizations and where the board is responsible for everything, or they have one paid staff person who's there to manage the operations but not necessarily the people. So when we talk about human resources, we're going to talk about paid staff, and volunteers, regardless of how they fit into your organization, we'll think of them as employees because we have that employer-employee relationship. I think the first thing I would recommend is that every organization have a playbook, an employee volunteer handbook, and a set of board policies and procedures. Read them, understand them, and most importantly, follow them. And there are sample documents out there that can help you get started if you don't already have one. I believe VFIS provides a sample for our clients, and use that as a template, but then make sure that you have your legal counsel review that to make certain that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. I also think that somewhere there should be documentation on who's responsible for those staffing, those employees, who makes those HR decisions. Is it a subset of the board, an executive committee? Is it a paid staff member? Is it the fire chief? Everyone needs to know who has the ultimate authority for human resources. I think the people that are listening are sitting in different parts of the country geographically. So each state, the federal government, each state has its own employment laws. Even there are some local employment laws. So you really need to know which apply to your organization. Once again, turn to your legal counsel to help them make that decision. I think another thing that you could take advantage of is seek out volunteers who have some HR experience. Like I said, Sara and I volunteer for nonprofit organizations. We often field calls from outside organizations saying, so what about this? What about that? Just last week, I got an email from an executive director of a nonprofit organization seeking some input on salaries because we know pay scales have, just really escalated in the last year, and wanting to know what companies were doing for budgets and budgeting for salary increases. I was able to send her some documentation that I had access to that she couldn't get because she wasn't in the HR field. So really reach out to those volunteers.
So in risk control, we often reference the safety culture within an organization being an important factor in the success of a department's risk management goals. Can you talk about the importance of culture in an organization as it relates to leadership effectively managing their workforce?
I'm going to start that, and then I think Sara will tag along. The culture of safety, I think, is an important part of a strong overall culture. And when I think of culture, I think of an organization's core values, not so much about what they do, but how they do it, as kind of a set of shared beliefs and values. And successful leaders, they live that culture on a day-to-day basis, and that's demonstrated in the way they communicate with their employees, their customers, their volunteers, how they work together as a team and make decisions, and just overall how they treat people and respond to problems. So it really is a set of core values. So here at Glatfelter, we have, a set of core values that you can feel those values being lived on a daily basis in our hallways. The trust, respect, the integrity. We're doing the right thing. We believe in teamwork. We're very involved in our community. Those are our core values, and they're demonstrated on a daily basis. And it's really leaders' responsibility to show and live those values so that the employees can feel it. And I think a strong value-based culture enhances the trust and cooperation, and it really creates a community within your organization.
Yes, Suzanne, I think you said that very well. And I always go to the impact of a strong culture. If you have a team that is rowing in the same direction, you are going to be better equipped to meet your goals. And I say that when you develop that culture where you feel respected and you have a voice and you're valued, then you will find that the team, they all share that common goal. And to tag on to your first question, when you find yourself in an HR role, I always say that you have to remember the human part of that if you are treating people with respect and not necessarily being the gatekeeper, but being the person who really is engaging your employees, you'll find that the HR role is much more effective as someone who is looked at as the person who's bringing about that culture. And I think people and culture are so important in any organization.
Absolutely. That's something we preach. As I said in the question, we preach safety culture a lot in an organization. So that just shows that it's not just applies to the safety side of operations, that it applies to how we treat our personnel. So the next question I have, it's a bit of a loaded question, and we could probably do an entire episode on each topic. But what are some key areas to consider when it comes to hiring new staff, disciplining our existing staff, or making that decision to terminate employment?
Thanks, Chris. It is a loaded question, but it's a very important one. I think that if we take it in chunks, the hiring, I think that is a really important task that we should take seriously, because hiring is your associates or employees are your greatest investment, and you are going to be investing your time and resources in finding the right people to do these tasks. And so I always say that if you are going to be the person who is tasked with hiring, you want to be prepared. You want to make sure that you are developing questions to ask the people who may come on board so that you can find out if they are a good fit for your organization, if they share your core values and they are ones that are going to be team players. So develop those questions. Of course, we always have the do's and don'ts of interviewing too, those questions that you don't want to ask. I could go on, there's a list of them, but I think it's important that you remember that we want to ask questions that are going to be finding out if this person is a fit for your role. So we do have the questions that we don't want to ask regarding their age and their gender and their marital status, their national origin, those kind of things that we want to steer clear of. But if we develop the appropriate questions to get to the core of what we're looking for, I think that you will find that your investment is a good use of your time in getting to the right associates. And then that leads us to when we have our employees on staff. We want to make sure that we have good communication back and forth, that there's an understanding of what they're going to be doing and how we want them to do it, and we want to coach them and encourage them. And if we find ourselves in a position where somebody maybe isn't meeting those expectations, what do we do at that point? Because it's an investment, this person is, we want to make sure that we're going to give them the tools to be successful. We don't want to have to sever that relationship. If we can salvage it, that's our priority. And so we want to make sure that we can develop expectations. We want to document what is expected and what we need to see if it's, going off the track. And documentation is always important, because if we do end up having to sever that relationship, we want to know that we've done everything possible to make it work. And if it didn't, then we want to take the necessary actions to do that respectfully, with dignity. And I think, Suzanne, you can probably add on to that as well, as how we can end those relationships.
Each organization is different. When we're talking about with emergency service organizations, some may work in a unionized environment or really have very strict progressive discipline policies. It's very, very important to follow them consistently as you go through, if you're having performance issues. I think one of the things, too, that's very difficult when it comes to performance is separating kind of technical performance versus behaviors and attitudes. And we always struggle with the behavior and attitude issues, and how do we coach around those. And it's much more difficult to terminate. Not only personally, it's harder, but it's a little more difficult to kind of legally terminate someone with for attitude and behavior. So always, when it comes to be safe, when it comes to a termination, really, once again, get in the experts, the legal counsel, to help with that, to make sure that you're not violating anyone's personal rights, and you've covered all of your equal opportunity requirements.
And job descriptions, I would assume, are a key component of this, because in the first aspect of it, in hiring, they need to know what's expected of them. And then you talked about the performance side. How are we going to measure performance if we don't know what we're expected to do? And so I would think that job descriptions are a very key component.
Yeah, and that ongoing conversation. I was just in a meeting earlier today talking about performance management and having those, touch points with your employees, and really having performance discussions, mid-year checkpoints, and just, when a poor review comes about, it should never be a surprise, because you should have been having that ongoing dialogue all along. So that's really important, because we don't want to terminate anyone. We don't want that separation. We want to coach them and develop them so they really are a valued employee.
Excellent point. So the past 15 years has seen a number of changes in the workforce, with greater awareness shown towards harassment, discrimination, gender equality, and et cetera. How have these changing dynamics impacted the workforce and the management strategies that we use?
Chris, I would agree that we have greater awareness of the diversity within our organizations and our workforce. Diversity of gender, race, age, sexual orientation, and sexual identification. And as leaders, we need to ensure that our work environment is accepting of all of those, all that diversity. Everyone that works with us, that we interact with, is treated equally and feels valued and respected. So that goes back to your culture and your core values, that trust, that respect, that core value of integrity, and that we're living those values in every. So if we're living those values, as issues of harassment and discrimination should be non-existent. There shouldn't be any complaints, because people should feel valued and heard. I think what I've seen kind of more when it comes to diversity, it comes with managing age differences in the workforce, because every kind of generation has different expectations. And in our environment, working from home, people have become very comfortable with the flexibility that offers. And I would say our younger people in our workforce, that's what they're very accustomed to, and they're looking for greater work-life balance. So for those of us who might be older, in an older generation, we have to switch our mindset and think, okay, we need to create that flexibility not only for the younger, but that will benefit everyone in the workforce if we can think about how we can achieve that work-life balance. Now, as an emergency responder, I don't know how much work-life balance there is when that alarm goes off or that call comes in, but you can also think about ways that you're treating those volunteers and those employees when they're on site in the fire station, and what flexibility and little perks you're giving to make that environment good.
And I was going to add on to that. Right now, the labor market is so challenging. And I think that if we are going to not have a revolving door of employees, and if we want to make sure that we are going to be able to fill these jobs, we have to be sure that we have a very wide lens, and that we are making sure that we are looking at everyone and the value they can add to our organization, different perspectives, different walks of life. Those kind of things all are going to add color to the organization and make it very well-rounded. And I think that we really have to be sure that we are looking at all outlets, and if we can bring everyone on board, and as I said earlier, rowing in the same direction, you're going to find these people are bonding, and they're not going to want to leave, and we're not going to have the turnover, because we're going to create that environment where everyone is welcome and respected.
And I think this is the first time in history that we've had 5 generations in the workforce. So you're having to manage 5 completely different types of personalities, mindsets, work expectations, work ethics. So it's got to be a huge challenge for the people in charge of managing the personnel. So one last question. It's something that you touched on earlier, but I think it's a great way to end the conversation because it's so important. We have a national client base and labor laws that can vary from state to state for many of our clients. How can local legal counsel play a role in helping ESOs navigate management liability laws in their area?
I think legal counsel plays a very important role, making sure that you are following all of the applicable employment laws, making sure you're following your own internal policies and procedures. And if for some reason that you have a complaint, a harassment complaint, a discrimination complaint, either internally from an employee, a volunteer, or from a customer or a client, someone that those complaints need to be investigated thoroughly, and legal counsel is probably the best avenue to have that accomplished. Many of us internally might not have that experience in how to do that effectively. So I would really recommend legal counsel. And anytime you do any official policies or procedures, I would run those through a legal lens as well.
Well, I really appreciate the time today. That was a lot of great information. It was opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that we get questions asked about, so we can reference this podcast and hopefully help some clients out. So, Suzanne, Sarah, I want to thank you for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program today and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guests today, Suzanne McConkey and Sara Spangler, once again for their time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Future programs will discuss many more of the exposures facing those in the emergency services industry, and will highlight ways to help reduce your risk. Also, if you like what you've heard today, please consider leaving a comment or a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing us at VFISRiskControl@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Glatfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.